Hi everyone, this is Tony, and I'm really excited about this opportunity to disseminate information to you using the power of technology. And because we are mindful of your limited time and how much you have on your plates, we decided to use this online video so we can give you some information about new laws that go into effect on January 1st, 2014. These are selected laws. The reason why they were selected is because I thought they would be relevant to the work that we do with our students and our staff members. Okay, first law, Assembly Bill 56, written by Weber. And what this law requires by July 1st, 2015, all buildings within a public or private school are required to have carbon monoxide devices. And basically, these would be in pursuant of the 2016 California Building Standards Code. And so what influenced this law was in Finch, in an elementary school called Finch in Atlanta, Georgia, there was about 50 students that were complaining of feeling extremely nauseated. And after the file services arrived, it was determined that they were exposed to carbon monoxide due to a leak in a heating furnace. So if you have some information about this, if you're in need of information about this law, please seek Dr. Kenny Clark or Michael Miller's information support. Assembly Bill 256, written by Garcia. And what this does is it changes Education Code 48900. It amends 48900R. As you know, 48900R is the suspension code that we use for bullying. This 48900R has been changed at least 3 or 4 times within the past 4 years, and this changes it again. It doesn't necessarily change our practice, but as you know, when Governor Schwarzenegger was governor, he signed Assembly Bill 66, which for the first time allowed us, to have a clear legal definition of what bullying is, and also it allowed school districts to hold jurisdiction over kids if they were implementing bullying via electronic means. So we still cannot suspend or refer for an expulsion any students unless the bullying has an impact on school-related activities. But what this law does is it clarifies that electronic act can be originated on or off the school site, where prior to this it did not specify that in the legal language. So once again, it doesn't change practice for us, but it does clarify that the student can do it either on or off campus, and if he or she does, we still are required to provide support or evidence that affirms that the bullying act was bullying, and B, it did have an impact on school-related activities. Assembly Bill 449, and talked a little bit about this with Dr. Sherry Beats today, and what this does is, as you know, most likely know, current law requires district staff to report any type of allegations of acts or omissions of any type of adverse actions conducted by certificated staff members to what's called the Committee of Credentials, which is appointed by the Commission of Teacher Credentialing. What this law does is this requires actually a district superintendent and or his or her designee to report to the commission if there's any change in the employment status of any certificated staff as a result of an allegation of misconduct or while an allegation of misconduct is pending. Initially, the law, if you fail to report this, willful neglect of reporting this law, reporting this to the commission, any type of infraction or concerns about a certificated staff, there was a fine of $100. They've increased the fine to $500 minimal and not to exceed $1,000. So keep an eye on this. If you need more information about this new law that goes into effect January 1st, please talk to Dr. Beats. Okay, Assembly Bill 465, Benia. Her name might be familiar. She tends to write a lot of educational related bills. This is not actually Ed Code. This changes penal code. But what this does is this clarifies that all youth sports programs in California are authorized to administer criminal background checks for any and all volunteer coaches, and also authorizes that these programs request subsequent arrest notification from the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice background checks that we all do when we get hired by the districts, they're all required to do that. This law also does not remove all coaches' responsibility that they are mandated reporters too. So that was actually clarified under the law. So this amends one of the penal codes with regards to that. Assembly Bill 549, written by Jones Sawyer. And what this does is it's required that we change the way we do our comprehensive school safety plans. As you recall, the one that's due March 1st. And what this requires is that there's clearer guidelines for the roles and responsibilities of any or all mental health professionals, school counselors, and or school resource officers that work on your campus. You're only required to do this if you have those staff members that work on your campus. Now, for the K through 8, you do have a school resource officer that's assigned to your schools, even though that person assigned to serve your school. So we can talk a little bit more about that. But if you do not have an elementary school counselor, then you're not required to do that. But if you do have some type of mental health provider or elementary school counselor, then you're required to describe what his or her role would be in the event that we had a disaster. So prevention, response, and recovery from any type of disaster. So more information to come about that. We'll definitely need to change the template for the comprehensive safety plan. Assembly Bill 570. This should not change any of the practice that we have in our district, but we'll talk to Susie Williams about this, and I will review our current board policy in AR. But what this does require is that districts ensure that students' civil rights are not violated, and that a student or a school district clearly adopts board policy in AR with regards to policies and procedures on how to identify, place, and the intake procedures for any and all students who voluntarily enroll in continuation high school. So there are districts which do involuntary transfer students to continuation high school, but not necessarily through the appropriate means, such as a hearing. So we'll talk more about that, and I'll work with Susie on this and rest of the cabinet to see what we need to do with BP and AR. I'm sure CSBA is going to give us sample AR and BP. Okay, Assembly Bill 643. What that does is that does amend Education Code. It makes various changes to conform how we release student records to others or other agencies. And what it does is, this is the second time it's happened within the past couple years, but what it's intended for is to make sure that the state system of releasing student records is aligned to the federal requirements. As you are familiar, FERPA, Federal Educational Rights Privacy Act, I believe that's what it stands for. So I will print something out and send it to you and the secretaries. What Assembly Bill 1068 does, this is more related to our two high schools, and what current law requires is that any student that completed 10th grade or is 16 years old or older, then that student is permitted his or her educational records. What this does is that any students that qualify as homeless or as an unaccompanied youth, we're required to release their educational records to them if they're 14 years or older. Okay, so Assembly Bill 1266. I'm sure you've seen and heard a lot of information about this new law that goes into effect. It's been in the press, but what this requires is all districts throughout the state are required to permit all transgender students to participate in any school program or activity, including that is consistent with that student's gender identity. So, for example, if you have a male student, I should say a student that is male biologically, but identifies or expresses herself as a female, then that student would have the right to participate in a female sport. This also includes facilities. So if you have a male student biologically who identifies or expresses herself as a female student, then that student has the right to female facilities, whether it's restroom or locker rooms. The law also talks about that student, we have to do what we can to identify that student by his or her desired name, if it's related to his or her gender identity or expression. It does state that the district is still required to maintain mandatory permanent pupil record with regards to that student's legal name. So Jim and I and the rest of the cabinet drafted AR that's consistent with the support that we've received from Dora Dome, and this information will actually be shared with you within the next few weeks. So more information to come with this, and we want to definitely make sure that we support all of our students, and obviously including our transgender students. So we'll share some good information with you so we can help you respond to any questions that you'll get from community members. Okay, once again, relevant more so for high school students, but as advocates for students, I think it's important that we all are aware of this. But for our foster students, Assembly Bill 216, as you are most likely familiar, Assembly Bill 167 that was passed, I believe it was about 3-4 years ago, because of the extremely high rate of foster youth students that were not graduating from high school. Excuse me, I'm drinking some water. What that did was any students that had transferred schools during his or her junior or senior year, 11th or 12th grade year, that student did not have to meet the local district graduation requirements. In fact, the requirements were a lot less. It was aligned to California state graduation requirements. So I'll give you one example. It'd be 3 courses of English as opposed to 4 years of English that is required by most districts. What this does is it does change it. If you have a foster youth that changes schools after his or her 10th grade year and can graduate by his or her 5th year in high school, then you're required to allow that student to stay in school until the end of his or her 5th grade year. That student also still qualifies for the minimal graduation requirements aligned to the state, but if that student can graduate with the district's graduation requirements by the end of his or her 5th grade year, you are required to allow that student to do so. The law requires that we inform all foster youth of this option to graduate for a 5th year. It also requires that foster youth and those who hold educational rights are informed on how this might affect his or her ability to gain admission to any type of post-secondary institutions, and also requires that we provide information about the community college system, that the student does have a right to stay during his or her 5th grade year. Doesn't have to be qualified for special education services. This would include foster youth students that qualify for just general ed services. And within 30 days of the fact that a staff member is aware that a foster youth qualifies for either this exemption or local graduation requirements, that we inform them of this. Regardless, all foster youth have the opportunity to go to school for 4 years. So if you have a foster youth kid that can graduate less than 4 years due to the Assembly Bill 167 state aligned graduation requirements, that student still has the right to stay for 4 years. So I will make sure I share this information with the guidance counselors too, but wanted to share this information with you. Okay. Assembly Bill 346, written by Stone. This is just more of that information for you. What this does is 20 out of the 58 counties throughout the state do not have any type of facilities or shelters for any runaway or homeless youth. So what this does is this now requires the definition for the community care facilities to change to where they can now provide services for any runaway students or homeless students. And so basically, they now can get reimbursed for doing this. So this is good news. This will increase the opportunities for students who, unfortunately, are runaways or homeless to receive 24-hour non-medical care. Once I get any more information from any external agencies or community-based agencies, I will make sure I share this information with you. Okay, Senate Bill 326. Currently, any individuals that are sex registrants that are basically found guilty to be sexual offenders, they can be on campus. I mean, obviously we have to look at every situation individually, but for the most part, they can be on campus if they have lawful business, such as, for example, being at an IEP or an SST for their student, come in, supervised by adults, they leave. But the law also allows principals, what they call, because it's penal code, they don't use educational code level, but they call it chief administrative official of the school, does allow for a principal to provide a sexual registrant to have access to the campus without lawful business. So what this does is, if there is a situation where a principal, and I'm not sure why any of our principals or any principal would want to do this, but if there is a situation where a principal wants to allow a sexual registrant to be on campus for no lawful reason, then what this requires is that you are to notify every single parent or guardian of every student on your school. And if or when you do this, because you're required to do that in that situation, then you are not going to be liable civically by the person, anybody. But if you don't do this and you willfully neglect to do this, then there's a fine punishable up to $500 and or 6-month jail sentence. So really interesting information. I wanted to share that with you. Amiano, same person that wrote the transgender bill, he's written several laws and bills intended to promote the rights of pupils and service students. He's also the one that wrote the laws to try to initiate corrective means as opposed to suspending kids for most of the infractions that we talked about last year. He's from San Francisco. So what he did was, there's a revision of penal code, and we talked about child abuse reporting and how every single staff member in the district is a mandated child abuse reporter if we reasonably suspect any student is being abused or neglected, whether it's emotionally or physically. What this does is this basically states that if the only reason you suspect a student is being abused or neglected, the only reason is because of that, you cannot submit a suspected child abuse report. So if the student is homeless or is an unaccompanied youth, and that's the only concern that you have, then you cannot submit a suspected child abuse report. I think I repeated myself 3 times. Hopefully that resonates with you. Okay, we are done. And if you have any questions, please call me. Please contact me. Please contact any other relevant cabinet member. Please give me feedback. You can also post questions or comments on the YouTube comment section. I want to close this by thanking you again and quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." Thank you and have a great day or evening.